Okay, have you ever stopped to think about how a massive company gets every single computer to follow the exact same rules? Well, today we are pulling back the curtain on this sort of hidden system that brings order to what would otherwise be total corporate chaos. It's called Windows Group Policy, and it is the super powerful tool that lets you manage thousands and thousands of machines all at once. So, yeah, let's dive in.
All right, just picture this for a second. You're an IT admin, right? And your company has, let's say, 10,000 employees. Now you've got to roll out a critical security update, or maybe something simple like change the company wallpaper or install brand new software on every single machine. I mean, going desk to desk, that's not just impossible, it's insane. So how in the world do you enforce one rule consistently across all of those computers?
Well, the answer is this really elegant and honestly incredibly powerful framework that's built right into Windows. And that answer is Windows Group Policy. Think of it like this centralized command center that lets organizations define and control pretty much everything about how computers and users operate. It really is the secret sauce for managing the masses. So, the big question is, how does this thing actually work? Well, it all boils down to one core idea, and that's carefully defining the scope of every single rule you create. Scope is really the fundamental building block of this whole system. It's just a way of defining which computers or which users a policy is going to affect. And getting this right is absolutely crucial because, it's the difference between a rule applying to the entire company or just accidentally targeting a single person over in accounting. Big difference. Okay, to make this super clear, let's use an analogy. Let's think of group policies as a collection of different company rule books, right? You've got the main rule book for absolutely everyone. Then you have smaller rule books for specific office locations. And you even have these little specialized rule books for individual departments. And just like in a real company, these rule books, they exist in a hierarchy. There's a very, very specific order in which the computer reads and applies them. It's not random at all. See, the policies get applied in this super logical order, starting really broad and then getting more and more specific. So first up, it begins with any rules on the local computer itself. Then it looks at rules for the physical network site, like the office building. After that, it applies the big company-wide rules from the domain. And then finally, it applies the most specific rules for a user's actual department, which is called an organizational unit, or just OU for short. And this is where our rulebook analogy just clicks into place perfectly. The local policy, that's like your personal desk rules. The site policy is the rulebook for your specific office building. The domain policy, that's the big one. It's the company-wide employee handbook that applies to everyone. And then the OU, that's the super specific rulebook just for your team, like, say, the one for the human resources department. So the key thing to get here is that these rules all stack on top of each other. But this brings up a really interesting question, doesn't it? What happens when the big company-wide handbook says one thing, but the little department rulebook says something totally different? Well, this brings us right to the heart of how group policy really works, conflict resolution. Because let's be honest, in any big system, rules are going to collide. It's just inevitable. Let's take a classic example here. The main company rule, that's at the domain level, it says every single computer has to have the official blue company logo as its wallpaper, okay? But the Human Resources Department, they have their own rule down at the OU level that sets the wallpaper to a nice, welcoming green team photo for all their new hires. So, who wins, blue or green? And the answer, it's actually beautifully simple. The rule that's closest to the user or the computer wins. That's it. Since the HR department's rulebook, the OU, is way more specific and closer to that new hire than the general company handbook, the domain, its rule is the one that takes precedence. Now, the official technical term for this is last writer wins, and it makes perfect sense, right? Because that OU policy is applied last in that whole hierarchy we just talked about. It gets the final say. It literally just writes over any of the previous more general settings. So, what's the outcome? Our new hire in HR logs in for the very first time, and what do they see? That friendly green team photo. Exactly what the HR department wanted, even though a bigger, broader company rule said something totally different. Pretty cool, right? Okay, but what if some rules are just too important to be overwritten? I mean, what if the main company handbook has a rule that absolutely positively has to apply to everyone, no exceptions allowed? Well, for that, we have what I like to call the unbreakable rules. This is done with a special setting called enforced. When an IT admin enforces a policy, they're basically making it a direct order from the CEO. It does not matter what any of those lower-level, more specific rulebooks say. An enforced policy wins, period. End of story. Yep, it is completely non-negotiable. In fact, in the management console that admins use, they literally see a little padlock icon right next to an enforced policy. It's a visual cue that says, hey, these settings are locked in and cannot be overridden by anything else. It's the final word. So the system is obviously super powerful, but what about nuance, right? Sometimes you need to get even more specific. Like, what if a rule for the HR department should only apply to the managers in that department? Or what if a software update should only go out to computers that have a specific version of Windows? For that kind of detailed work, you use filters. And they basically come in two main flavors. First, you have security filtering. This one just asks, who gets the policy? It's all about targeting specific users or groups of computers. But then you have WMI filtering, which is a little different. It asks, what is this machine? It actually checks a computer's specific details. Is it a laptop or desktop? Which version of Windows is it running? How much memory does it have? And then it decides if the rules should apply. All right, so we've gone through the whole hierarchy, the conflicts, the unbreakable rules, and even those super specific filters. So let's kind of zoom out for a second and talk about why this entire system is so incredibly critical for any modern organization. See, this layered control is really what makes group policy an absolute game changer. It gives companies airtight security by letting them lock down critical settings across the whole organization. It drives incredible efficiency by automating tasks that honestly would otherwise take months of manual labor. It guarantees consistency so every single user has a stable and predictable computer experience. And on top of all that, it still provides the flexibility to give special teams the special tools they need to get their specific jobs done. When you get right down to it, it's all about control. It's this elegant, totally logical system that allows just a handful of administrators to bring order, security, and consistency to what can otherwise be a sprawling, totally chaotic digital landscape. And that kind of brings us to a final thought for you to chew on. Now that you really understand the power of an enforced policy, just think about it for a second. If you could set one single, unbreakable rule for every single computer in your organization, what would you pick? Would it be a crucial security setting, maybe a productivity tool, or something else entirely? It's a pretty powerful idea when you stop and think about it.